Today I want to talk about Sydney as a place to invest, and particularly from the perspective of someone who doesn't live in New South Wales and they are considering buying in Australia's largest city. And being a Perth boy, the contrast between Perth and Sydney is so great because the density and the population and the lifestyle is very, very different in a whole range of components. So for me, the first thing to consider when investing in Sydney is to understand just the enormity as a focal point of the harbour and the beaches, because they are just so incredibly unique. If you think about that harbour, there's nothing quite like it anywhere else in Australia, and it's a huge activity zone for a lot of people. I mean, there's New Year's Eve fireworks, there's pleasure boats on the weekend, there's the Sydney to Hobart yacht race, cruise ships are coming in and out. It is definitely a focal point. So for a lot of people, the focus on it and the view and the proximity to the harbour is incredibly unique. So if you can get real estate that has a view or has that proximity to the harbour, that's definitely going to up the lifestyle component of those particular properties and hence increase the value of those properties. It also acts as a geographical limitation. Because if you think about people who live on the north side, it's very difficult to get on the south side because of the congestion, and likewise on the south side getting to the north. So communities tend to stay together in those particular regions separated by the harbour. The other thing that's so unique about Sydney is the beaches. And if you think about Western Australia or Queensland, there's these long sandy beaches. That doesn't happen in Sydney because there's heaps of cliff faces all the way up the coast. So you're there at Bondi, and then you get to Tamarama, and then you get to Bronte, then you're down to Maroubra in the south. But in between, there's all these cliff faces. So it's not as if it's just endless sandy beaches all the way. So you've got this huge population base and this highly desirable lifestyle weekend thing to do. And so if you can get near the beach or have the proximity or near the view, again, that lifts the lifestyle and also increases the demand and therefore increases the value of those properties. So for me, the number one consideration if you're investing in Sydney is to try and get as close as you possibly can to the harbour and the beaches. The second thing to consider is it's a highly desirable international city. So if you think of New York, Hong Kong, London, you just think they're really buzzing cities, and Sydney is very much in that category. And if you also think about those other international cities, housing affordability is a huge issue, and that's the case also in Sydney. So they have got this affordability challenge. But the one thing about Sydney that's quite unique compared to every other city in Australia, even more so than Melbourne, is 1 in 3 people live in an apartment. So they embrace this medium and high density, largely for affordability, but also just to be able to accommodate the sheer number of people that are there. So I guess the locals do embrace that density. So the challenge is if you live in a city where a house with some land is normal, don't be afraid to buy apartments in Sydney because that is in fact normal to them. So that's an important consideration. So when you are looking to invest in Sydney, investment grade is typically quite often an apartment for a lot of people. The third thing to consider is it's got 6 million people, and in the next 20 years it's going to get another 1.5 million, so grow by 25%. So congestion is normal. In fact, it's the congestion capital of Australasia. It's actually more, the road network and getting around is actually slower than New York, where the average is 72.5 kilometres an hour, including the M2 and the M7. So that is a lot of congestion. So if you're going into an international city with lots of people that have geographical limitations with the mountains and the ocean and the harbour, it's absolutely critical that you have proximity to the train. Because having the train to get you around this city is so important, and people will place a value on that. So if you're investing, you make sure that you follow those train lines because that's going to give you the best chance of getting wonderful growth in this city. The other thing to consider too is it's an outdoor lifestyle. It's a very temperate climate. They don't have the extreme highs, they don't have the extreme lows. So it's really friendly all year round. And if you think about what the drivers are, human activity, economic activity, human interest and human behaviour, they've got the CBD, which is largely an international workplace attracting internationally high salaries. But those human interest and human behaviour elements are largely around the outdoors. We talked about the beach, we talked about the harbour, but think about the parks, think about all of the lifestyle drivers. Where are the walkways for people to get out and enjoy this wonderful climate? So if you're thinking of buying a house, clearly some outdoor space is great, but if you're thinking of buying a unit, terraces and balconies are absolutely critical. And the bigger you can get, the absolute better, because people will use them, they'll embrace them, and it will form part of their lifestyle. And for me, the final consideration is around the idea of buying real estate in Sydney is you're probably typically going to go to an auction, right? So you've got to understand the auction process, but you've also got to understand gazumping, because in that city, you have this exchange system. So if I'm in Western Australia, I'm in South Australia, I'm in Queensland, offer and acceptance. You get it in writing, often you can do your due diligence afterwards. But in Sydney, you've got this exchange system where the vendor signs, the buyer signs, and then once the contract is exchanged, then we've got a deal. But quite often people will have a verbal agreement that they'll get the deal done. But then if someone else comes along and exchanges before they do, that's what's called gazumping. You miss out on the property. You think you've got the deal done. So what happens is you've got to get a lot of due diligence done in advance. And for you to have the best chance of getting a deal done in this city, you've effectively got to give them an unconditional contract with the due diligence all done prior to that point. Now the challenge with that is you can spend a lot of money getting this due diligence done with no guarantee of actually getting the property. So it's important that you understand it's a very auction-centric city also, but the fact that you can get gazumped is really, really important. So you need to be on your game, and you need to, if you don't know how to buy real estate in this city, you need to get some help from some professionals who'll help you do that. So I think it's a wonderful city to consider. If you're in Australia and you want to build a property portfolio that has a number of properties, it just makes sense to at some stage have Sydney real estate in your portfolio. But there's certainly some things to consider, and hopefully these 5 things that I've talked about will help you when you're looking to buy in the Sydney market.